Hi guys, welcome back, or welcome to Switch to Life. And today, leading up to the release of Despicable Me 4, we're going to be reviewing Despicable Me 2. And I gotta say that out of the entire franchise, this one is actually my favorite. And while I do admit that the first movie had a really awesome story, this one just takes that story and just evolutionizes it into the next chapter, and it's honestly awesome what they do here. So, let's dive into what makes this movie good. First off, the animation. I admit the animation for the first movie was good, but this one is way better, like almost twice as good. And I guess we could say the same thing about the music. The music was, again, really nice, but at the same time, it was really cool. And to be honest, a couple of the songs from this movie have become some of the most iconic songs in history. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. And of course, who could forget the voice acting? The voice acting, as always, in these movies is really awesome, especially when it comes to Steve Carell as Gru, and even Kristen Wiig does a great job as Lucy Wilde. And I hate to say it, but the minions in this movie are actually really awesome. Mostly due to the fact that they stopped being the annoying versions of themselves. We'll get more into that later. But then there's the story of this movie, and I will admit the story is really awesome. Not as good as the first movie, but still, it takes this franchise in a direction that you expect it to go, while also throwing in some twists and turns and still being extremely funny. So to recap, Gru has gone from being one of the best villains in the world and has decided to go good and become the best dad in the world. And so far, the best dad that we see in the entire Illumination library, so, you know. He even dresses up as a fairy princess so that his little girl's birthday party wouldn't be ruined, and that's real commitment of being a father right there. I just love that.
I know it's really you, Gru. I'm just pretending for the other kids.
But then a random lady walks up to Gru and decides to actually kidnap him. Yeah, okay, so it turns out that this lady is Agent Lucy Wilde, and she works for the AVL, the Anti-Villain League.
I am the League's director, Silas Ramsbottom.
Bottom.
Hilarious.
And they recruit Gru to help them think like a villain and make it so that they can stop a case where someone has stolen the PX41 serum, which is a chemical component that has the capability to turn any living creature it comes into contact with into a purple monster that only has one purpose on its mind: destroy.
I see where this is going with all the Mission Impossible stuff, but no! I'm a father now.
So at first, Gru turns this down because he's focused on trying to be a father. But then it's revealed that his lab partner, Dr. Nefario, wants to actually go back to being a villain and decides to seek employment elsewhere. So after bidding farewell to his oldest friend, literally, Gru decides to reconsider his career options, which is be a legitimate businessman selling jams and jellies, or become a super spy that helps stop the villains of the world. So they track down the PX41 serum hidden somewhere in the mall thanks to the chemical component, and then once they do that, they have to figure out who exactly the villain is. They think it's one of the mall owners, and one of them actually walks up to them. His name is Eduardo Perez, and for some reason, Gru actually thinks that Eduardo looks a lot like a former villain from 20 years ago named El Macho, who died in a volcano, so, you know.
They never found the body! Oh no! All that was ever retrieved was a pile of singed chest hair.
So they sneak into his restaurant, Salsa y Salsa, and discover his big secret salsa recipe. Yep, that's about it. They accidentally end up tripping his security alarm, which is just a chicken, but after managing to escape, they go back to searching for the real culprit, and they discover a suspect, Floyd Eagleson, who is the owner of a wig salon. And we'll get back to that, but while all this is happening, the girls, Margot, Edith, and Agnes, are exploring the mall, and they end up meeting Lucy.
Hello. Hi.
Are you single?
Now, the main reason that Agnes actually asks that question is because Agnes is getting a little bit sad because she doesn't have a mother. And while Gru definitely is a really good father and he's doing a great job as a single parent, she still desperately wants a mother figure in her life, and she just clings to Lucy. And at the same time, the rest of the girls are trying to get Gru a date so that he can eventually fall in love and get married, and they can actually have a mother as well. Unfortunately, Gru just doesn't really want to go on any dates because he had a bad experience with women as a kid. Still, that doesn't stop a bunch of women from trying to go out with him, especially when his neighbor Jillian keeps trying to set him up with them. And even though Gru keeps saying no, Jillian just doesn't back down and even sets him up on a blind date with a girl named Shannon, who is a really, really weird and abusive woman. Seriously.
Solid.
We are in the restaurant, you know.
And the date just goes so horribly, but at the same time, Lucy actually shows up just for dinner for one, and then she sees Gru going on his date and it's going bad, so she decides to use a tranquilizer dart on Shannon, and then Gru and Lucy escort Shannon to her house, and they end up bonding over the car ride, and eventually Gru actually falls in love with Lucy. They continue with the mission and discover Floyd Eagleson's hair salon actually has some trace amounts of the chemical PX41 serum inside of it, and then Gru is stopped when the girls rush up to him and says that Margot has fallen in love. And then there's also a C plot where Margot actually discovers a cute boy while exploring the mall, and she ends up falling in love with him. And it turns out that this cute boy is none other than the son of Eduardo Perez, and the thing is, Gru actually wants to keep Margot safe because he knows what happens when girls fall in love with boys, especially boys who are so flipping hot like he is. And Gru wants to keep Margot safe, and he comes up with a bunch of excuses why this boy is bad, and one that he comes up with is that this guy is the son of El Macho because Eduardo just looks a lot like El Macho. So he goes to the AVL and says they should lock up Eduardo
And his deviously charming son. I'm pretty sure that the son is involved too. The son, also. You got to get the son. Lock up the son. Don't forget about the son. The kid gives me the creeps. I think that the son is the mastermind. There's a devilish look in his eyes, and I don't like it.
But since Gru doesn't actually have any proof, they decide to go to Floyd Eagleson instead, where they find an empty canister of the PX41 serum. So they arrest Floyd, and they end up saying the mission's over, case is closed, and the mission's done. So now Lucy will be given a new mission where she will be sent to Australia, and
Already been working on my accent. Wallaby, didgeridoo, Hugh Jackman.
Gru, who didn't really help out that much, is fired from the AVL. So Lucy is about to go to Australia, and of course that breaks Gru's heart since he literally just fell in love with her, and even though he tries to get up the courage to ask her out on a date before she goes, he just doesn't, which again is actually pretty relatable. And so instead he ends up going to the Salsa y Salsa Cinco de Mayo party because Margot wants to be with her new boyfriend, and which Gru is still not okay with. But at the party, Eduardo says something suspicious, which makes it so Gru decides to follow him to a secret lair where Eduardo reveals himself to actually be El Macho. And then El Macho reveals his big plan, which was work with Dr. Nefario to kidnap a bunch of Gru's minions, at which point he would use the PX-41 to turn them into brainless, mindless, indestructible killing machines. And since he has an army of them, he will use them to take over the entire world. I gotta say, that's a really great plan. And he probably would have gotten away with it if it weren't for one thing. He wanted to work with Gru to take over the world. He actually respects Gru and his time as a villain, and he wants to work with him to take over the world for some weird reason. Probably because Dr. Nefario said that Gru should be part of this since it's his minions that are being used. And then Gru decides that he doesn't actually want to do this since he wants to be a good father, so he ends up slowly walking away, and then he goes to collect the girls and bring them home from the party, in the process discovering a sad Margot. Now, I find it a little weird that in the final battle, El Macho didn't acknowledge the fact that Gru froze his son, which is really weird because, El Macho is the guy's father, isn't he? Well, I actually have a theory. What if this guy, Antonio, isn't actually Eduardo's son? What if he's actually just being paid by El Macho to pretend to be his son so that he can get Margot to fall in love with him and come to Salsa y Salsa, thus giving Gru a reason to come to Salsa y Salsa, where El Macho can then talk to Gru and get him on board with the villain plan. Is it a bit overcomplicated and unnecessary? Yeah, probably. But I think that's a part of El Macho's character. Also, when it comes to their on-screen appearance, we don't really see a lot of familial love between the two. Sure, Eduardo acts like he's Antonio's father, but that's just one scene. He never talks about his son ever again. Then Antonio just acts like he doesn't care who this man is, which, again, most teenagers act like that, but it's a little weird. And to think, if this thing is all staged and Antonio was pretending to fall in love with Margot, then it makes sense that he would break up with her the second El Macho gave the go-ahead, I talked with Gru, you can do whatever you want now. But if this thing is not staged, then that just means that Antonio is a real jerk. But let's move on. Lucy ends up realizing on her flight to Australia that she has fallen in love with Gru and wants to be near him. So she ditches the plane and ends up going to the Salsa y Salsa party where she tries to find Gru since she knows that he will be there. And then when Gru leaves and Lucy shows up, Eduardo has a talk with Lucy, at which point the chicken actually ends up revealing that Lucy's identity is an AVL agent, and so Eduardo kidnaps Lucy, and for some reason Dr. Nefario notices, and the thing is, he knows that Lucy is a very special person to Gru for some strange reason, because the two met after Nefario quit, so a little weird. And then he calls Gru, says Lucy has been kidnapped, and this forces Gru to sneak into El Macho's lair to try to rescue Lucy, and at the same time stop his plot to use the PX-41 minions to take over the world. One of these minions, namely Kevin, who was in the Minions movie, ends up being released so that he can hunt down Gru and the girls. And when he gets to Gru's house, he attacks the girls, and then Dr. Nefario shows up at the last second with the antidote, and he ends up pouring it into the horrible jelly that Gru has been making at the start of the movie, and then they use the jelly and make jelly guns, at which point they go to El Macho's fortress where Gru is having trouble fighting back against the evil minions, and then once the jelly gun arsenal shows up, they all fight back against the evil minions and turn them back to normal. So El Macho, at this point having lost his army, reveals the last trick up his sleeve. Lucy is tied to a rocket.
One push of this button, and I send that rocket straight into the same volcano where I faked my death. Only this time is for real.
Fortunately, Eduardo loses the launch button, and then Gru ends up fighting back against him, but Eduardo uses the PX-41 serum on himself to turn him into a purple monster whose sole purpose is to destroy Gru. And eventually Gru, without any means of jelly gun arsenal, has to fight back against him using a bunch of random gadgets, including the freeze ray, but in the end, the one that wins is the one that Lucy gave to him as a gift. After making him weak, they use a fart gun to knock out Eduardo, at which point Gru tries to free Lucy from the rocket, and the chicken presses the launch button.
I really hate that chicken.
This makes it so that Gru and Lucy are both being sent straight into a volcano, and Gru, realizing that this is near the end, has only one regret. He decides to finally ask Lucy out on a date. And after she says yes, they jump off the rocket to safety, and 147 dates later, they decide to get married. And the movie ends with Agnes giving a toast, and it turns out to be the Mother's Day speech she was supposed to give at the start of the movie for a school project.
She kisses my boo-boos. She braids my hair. My mother is beyond compare. We love you, mothers everywhere.
But she does her own twist on it, and this time she actually says it with enthusiasm, because finally she actually has a mother. And thus the movie ends. Now, I'm gonna say it, this movie was really awesome and extremely good. I don't think it could have been any better. Well, maybe a little less minions, but I feel like that the amount of screen time the minions had was acceptable. It was funny, and at the same time, didn't take away from the plot. Honestly, I hate to say it, but Despicable Me 2 might actually be my favorite of the entire Illumination lineup. It's definitely my favorite of the Despicable Me franchise. But with that in mind, what did you guys think? Make sure to leave some of your thoughts down below in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe so that you can keep up to date as to when I release the reviews for Despicable Me 3 and 4 when it hits theaters on July 3rd. With that in mind, I hope that you're all staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
How come you're so fat?
Because my house is made of candy, and sometimes I eat instead of facing my problems.